Okay, we're going to start with a go round, and Perry Sedman of our executive committee is going to lead that. Just for folks to introduce themselves, I'll let Perry explain what we're going to do, and it's just a way to connect and to be together before we launch into the call.
Yeah, thanks, Nanette. What we usually do is just go around and I will call on you, and for a minute or so you can share your name and where you are physically, and perhaps, you know, what you're looking at, and anything else you want to mention briefly. Okay, so I'm just going to pick out photos from the Zoom call, and I'm going to start with you, Myrna.
Okay, hi there, everyone. I'm Myrna McCallum. I'm zooming in from Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, also known as Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis, who is my people. But I live in North Vancouver on the West Coast. What I'm looking at, snow falling on the ground, I don't know. I'm going to hand it over to Aideen.
Great, thank you.
Aideen? Yeah.
Hi, so I'm Aideen Byrne. I'm currently in Northern Ireland, which is not where I'm from. I'm from the south in Kilkenny, and I usually now live in New York. I'm also looking at snow, but like a lot less. I'm imagining a lot less. I'm so excited for today's call. I can't wait for us to jump into it and to connect with you all. I think it was 2020 was the first time I joined a PISLAP call. And I can't believe that we're here. Really beautiful.
We
So
are
thank you.
indeed. Yeah, sure. Duncan?
So I'm Duncan Holloman, and I am on Cape Ann in Massachusetts. It is a gloriously clear day, and we did indeed have our first snow last night. So we have just a dusting, which is lovely. And from here, I can actually see the water. I can see the inner harbor of Gloucester Harbor, which is part of the reason that I bought this little condo. So it's a real delight to be able to see water and to see all of you.
Welcome, Duncan. Very nice. Tahir Perlman. Tahir? You're
Hi.
muted.
Yes,
okay, there you
I
go.
saw that. Hey, everyone. Yeah, Tahir Perlman. I'm reporting live from Kingston, New York in the Hudson Valley. I'm in my windowless office at Legal Services of the Hudson Valley, where I do legal aid, housing defense work. I don't see the snow right now. But yeah, it did snow quite a bit here, probably like 3.5, 4 inches, and it's a winter wonderland. And even though I'm experiencing, seasonal symptoms of depression, I still love the winter. I just find it so cozy to be indoors and look out the snowy window. Thank you.
Okay, Your Honor, Bruce Peterson. You're looking at snow too, I'll bet, right?
Not Your Honor anymore, Perry. I'm in my I'm a retired judge, so I'm in my home office in Minneapolis. And there's plenty of snow outside, although it's been very cloudy and kind of a little drizzly the last few days, so a lot of it's going fast, but there's more on the way. So you're all welcome to a winter wonderland if you want to come out.
Very good. Welcome. Bonnie, you're next on my screen.
Okay, I'm Bonnie Silvestri. I live in Sarasota, Florida, and the closest I got to any snow in many years was being in the Nutcracker this past weekend, and close proximity to the snow scene as a part of the party scene. So nowhere near snow in quite some time, and I'm calling from my office. Thank you.
Okay, welcome. Catherine?
Hi, everyone. I think this might be the first time I have joined a call. I just popped onto Facebook and saw the announcement and thought, oh, I have a little window and that sounds like a beautiful talk. So I'm grateful to be here and see you all, some of whom I know, but a lot of whom I don't. I am in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I am currently in my home office / homeschool room, and it's pretty sunny and mild today, and my 9-year-old is building a fort on the other side of the room. And yeah, I have my own legal practice here. So it's beautiful to connect with you all.
Great, great. Welcome, welcome. Ms. Rahman, what is your first name?
Me.
Oh, sorry.
It's Motir.
Yeah.
Was that me? Sorry.
Okay. Yes,
Uh,
you.
Sorry, my full name's gone. Can you hear me?
Yes. We can hear you.
Yes. Hi, it's Mothia. I've been to.
Sorry.
I've not been on a while. Interestingly enough, just today I was talking to somebody about trying to bring my. She sent me a link to something called the UK definition of trauma-informed practice, and then I saw this was coming up, and I was like, oh, I'll just put a link to that because she sent me that. And today it was just half an hour before I saw Nanette's email, so I was like, oh, I'll just come and join this call because and what I'm looking at right now is a sign thing, community of dragons. If you can see there, which is kind of a shared office space, but they're friendly dragons. That's something that we admire. It's a kind of a new economy space that I'm in. Thank you.
Welcome. Sorry I didn't recognize your
calling
face.
from Devon in England. Sorry.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Jonathan, welcome.
Hello, Perry. Hello, everyone. I'm Jonathan Shar from Madison, Wisconsin. I was currently looking at my lunch and looking at an afternoon of meetings and a training later that I can somehow see from here. There's a little bit of snow outside, similar to Bruce, but again, likewise, it's been sort of raining a bit, and so a lot of it is sort of melted. So there's some pretty sad-looking snowmen standing around, a little droopy. But otherwise, doing well. Happy to be here.
Well, welcome. Good to have you. Elaine?
Hi, everyone. I'll keep it brief, but really nice to be here, and equally cold, as it sounds like it is everywhere. It's about -3 here, and I'm currently building Lego with my 3-year-old. But as I said, I'm also very much here, and yeah, lovely to see familiar faces.
Say where you are, Elaine.
Oh, sorry, say where I am. I'm in Ireland. I'm in the Republic of Ireland right now.
Okay, good.
County Longford.
Brad?
Hi.
Roth?
Hi, yes, thank you. Sorry, let me see if I can turn on my video here. Hi, nice to see everyone. So I'm in New York. I have a green lamp emerging from my head. Yeah, we have some contractors in the apartment here doing repairs, so I'm off camera, but I'm in New York City, in Manhattan, and very glad to be here, and nice to see some familiar faces, all these familiar faces. And I'm looking, I guess if I turn to the left, I'm looking out at a courtyard with brown branched trees and with a little bit of fall foliage, and the buildings of New York City. And very happy to be here.
Good to have you.
Go off camera again.
Good to have you. Michelle Keith.
Hi, I'm Michelle Keith. I'm here in Massachusetts. I'm actually in the car right now, so I see the highway, but I'm listening intently and very interested and happy to be here today. And Aiden, it's so wonderful that you're here in the U.S. in New York. Well, you're in Northern Ireland right now, but you're staying here in New York. I just wanted to mention to everybody who has access to New York on May 1st, the American Bar Association is having a Law Day event in New York, and it's going to be celebrating civics, civility, and collaboration as the cornerstones of democracy. So we're going to be visiting the United Nations in the morning. We're going to be doing a session at JAMS on mediation and arbitration, how important that is as an alternative to the courts. And then it looks like we may be visiting the mayor's office in the afternoon. And then there's a Yankees game that night. So if you are in New York on May 1st, come join us for a theme, I think, that matches with you know, our attempt to heal as lawyers, you know, and to collaborate and work together.
Welcome,
It's wonderful to be
Michelle.
here. Thank you.
It's good to have you. Jennifer?
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. From Denver, or good morning, actually, from Denver, Colorado. I'm Jennifer Jones-Benino, and I live right here in downtown Denver, and we're kind of bracing for a storm that's rolling through the plains. So it's an overcast day. You can see much of the city, and it's just beautiful, relaxing Monday. Glad to be here.
Welcome, welcome. Julie?
Oh, hi, everyone. It's so great to be with this group from so many different places. I'm actually calling in from Ashland, Massachusetts. I was on my way back from central Connecticut yesterday, and although the snow wasn't that heavy, I was slipping and sliding so much that I ended up getting off the road and staying with a friend. So I'm working from her home today in Ashland, Massachusetts. And it's just wonderful to be here. It seems like it's going to be a great topic. So thank you. And I'm also from Cape Ann, as someone else said. Yeah, thank you.
Good to have you, Julie. Good to have you. Someone is calling in who I can't identify, from area code 407. Can you introduce
That's
yourself?
me. It's Kim Wright.
Oh, Kim
Hi.
Wright. Hi, Kim. Hi, Kim. Where are you? Where are you now?
I am in North Carolina now, and I'm breaking the news that I am no longer going to be a nomad. I'm going to live in North Carolina.
Oh,
Wow.
Congratulations.
After 15 years. And I'm sitting in a parking lot waiting for someone who is, I'm happy to say, late for a meeting. And so I've been able to stay on. I just at least wanted to get on while I could, because Myrna and I are co-editors of the Trauma Informed Law book. And I'm excited that she's here.
Excellent. Good to have you, Kim. Someone just hopped on, Dr. Daniele. We are saying our name, where we are physically, and what we look like, just to what we're looking at, just as a way of connecting. Disappeared from my screen. Well, that's that. I am Perry Sedman. I am in Miami Beach, Florida. There is no snow within miles of here. I am looking out over Biscayne Bay and the skyline of Miami in the distance, and it is about 75 degrees and sunny, and I won't ruin your day by telling you any more. Nanette, it's your turn to say, and then you can turn it over to our coordinator.
I think Yael Daniele has just rejoined us. Do you want to introduce yourself, Yael? Or do you maybe have connection problems?
Oh, I see.
I think you're on mute again.
Yeah, I think she's just muted.
Yeah. If not, just feel free to put it in the chat, and we welcome you. Okay. Hi, everyone. Great to hear from everyone here from, as we said, far and wide. I'm Nanette Shore, and I also live in New York City. It's a really sunny, beautiful day here, but it's quite cold, and it did snow for the first time this morning, continuing our snow theme. So welcome to all, and I'm now going to turn it over to Aideen Byrne to introduce Myrna to us. Aideen is responsible for connecting us with Myrna and making this call possible. So much appreciation to Aideen. Over to you, Aideen.
Hi, I'm so excited to have made that connection. I love what I've learned from PISLAP over the last few years, and the support from you all. It's really beautiful. And then I met Myrna just through a colleague in international justice over the summer. We were talking about trauma and just difficulties in like the legal profession and in human rights work, and she told me about this, and this was a German lawyer actually, so connections from all over the world. She told me about this amazing Indigenous woman who's doing this like transformative work about trauma. And I was just in time to sign up for Myrna's trauma-informed justice course. And that was over the summer, and honestly it has like fueled me since and kept me going so much in this work and just in life when things have been really hard over the past while. And so to bring this connection between these two groups is really, really powerful. I really don't think that I could do Myrna's introduction justice. When Myrna introduces herself, I absolutely love it because it's always a focus on being a mother, a grandmother, a lawyer, but all the beautiful, like powerful, good things in life, and not just the things that have been hard and difficult. So really, I just hope that everybody can just listen and learn, and we'll have a great conversation afterwards. And I'll let Myrna introduce herself properly.
Thank you, 18. Okay, hi everyone, and hi Kim. I'm so glad you're on the call. I missed your face. Ever since we've finished putting this book together that the ABA is publishing in March on trauma-informed law, I haven't actually been having regular meetings with Kim and the other editors, so makes me a little sad. Okay, so I want to just say, I'm sure, I don't know how much people in this room know about trauma-informed lawyering or what trauma-informed lawyering is. And so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how I came across trauma-informed lawyering after I tell you a tiny bit about myself. So I want to just say before I start this presentation, I'm just a lawyer. That's all I am. I mean, I don't have a background in psychology. I'm not a mental health specialist. I didn't study social work, none of it. Everything I have come to learn about trauma, I learned through the practice of law. And then once I got a basic understanding, I began to start reading folks like Bessel van der Kolk and Peter Levine and Thomas Hubel and of course Gabor Mate, and began to really supplement my understanding of what's actually going on in the body, or what's happening in the brain that causes people to communicate the way they do or behave the way they do, or what the connection is between historical trauma and offending behavior or behaviors that bring people into courtrooms. So I want to just put that out there. As Aideen mentioned, I am a grandmother, and I think that's my greatest claim to fame. I'm a grandmother of 3. My grandchildren are 5, 3, and 2, and I've been babysitting for the last week, so I'm a little exhausted. And why is that my claim to fame? Because I don't know how much any of you know about Canada or the history of Indigenous people in Canada, but some people know I went to residential school. I think Native Americans experience those as boarding schools, Indian boarding schools. And the last one closed in my home province here in Saskatchewan in 1996. So it's not that uncommon to see folks as young as myself having gone to those schools. And I would say probably the greatest legacy of the Indian residential school system was how it created incredible traumas that are still felt today in communities. And how does it manifest when we, how do I identify it? I see it in high suicide rates. I see it in high alcoholism rates, high substance abuse rates, domestic violence, incarceration, all of these really horrific things. And so given where I've come from, prior to residential school, I came from a really violent home, a violent childhood. So, the odds of me succeeding were not very, very good. So that's why I say, my greatest claim to fame is that I became a grandmother, and that I'm a pretty good grandmother to boot. So Like I said to you, I'm a lawyer. Part of what drove me to or attracted me to the practice of law when I was growing up, and keep in mind, I grew up in a community of like a very tiny community way in the north. There wasn't, we didn't talk about careers. Like we were constantly in survival mode. So people were just thinking about how to get a job, how to put food on the table. We never thought about education. Why? Because we didn't trust education. Why would we, given what happened to us in those schools? We didn't think about careers, talk about careers. We're just, living, just living day by day. And one day I happened to be watching some American crime show when I was a teenager, and all of these lawyers seemed to be really, like they seem to be unfeeling, uncaring, dehumanizing, and just ruthless. And I thought, that's exactly what I want to be when I grow up. Why? Because by being detached, being dissociated, I'd never have to actually inquire with myself what has happened in my life that compelled me to be the way I was at that time, which was really, a lot of those things. And then when I get into law school, I'm feeling pretty confident that I chose the right path. Why? Because all I was hearing about was legal issues, identifying legal issues. I never heard about humanity, humility, vulnerability, empathy, compassion, none of that stuff. And then when I went to do the bar course, it was more of the same. And it was only when I got into the practice of law that I was confronted with a lot of trauma. So I started off in civil litigation because I really thought that what I wanted back then was to just work with paper. I really didn't want to work with people. But then when I realized that the practice area I chose, it would take forever for me to get into court, because inevitably we had to, all Indigenous related matters, like we're talking about title and land rights, inevitably it would have to go to the Supreme Court of Canada, and that takes a really long time. But I was more about like immediate gratification. So a friend of mine said, why don't you come back from the West Coast, come home to Northern Saskatchewan and practice criminal law. You'll be in court all the time. And so I decided to do that, not really knowing what I was getting myself into. And in the practice of criminal law, I found I was like on the front line of human suffering every day. I started off as a defense lawyer working for legal aid. It wasn't long before I became a prosecutor. And what I came to realize right off was that every time I was dealing with people who had experienced intimate partner violence, which was a lot of people, I was constantly being triggered because I would see my mom in these women. Every time I was dealing with children who'd experienced sexual abuse, neglect, or some form of abuse, I would think about myself because that's what I experienced as a kid. So every day coming into court was a trigger of a childhood that I'd been running from. And in my efforts to become even more dehumanizing, because I couldn't confront my own humanity, I started to cope in really unhealthy ways, became really isolated, depressed, anxious, like all kinds of things started to manifest, and I couldn't understand it at the time. And then not too long before I left prosecutions, I met a little boy who was about 6 years old, and I had to I was the prosecutor assigned to the thing that he had experienced. I won't go into the thing because that's not necessary, but I could tell you that he'd been through something quite horrific. And I knew then that I could not prepare this child for trial the way I prepared so many people in this kind of dehumanizing, disconnected, take a seat, I'm going to tell you how it's going to go sort of way. And I decided to drive to his community, meet his parents, spend the day with them, and spend the day with him and talk to him as he showed me where he plays. And I got the story from him, and he didn't skip a beat. And it was a completely different way of doing what I'd been doing in a really kind of rigid transactional way for a few years. And it changed everything after, after several months of relationship building with this family and me kind of, being sort of not knowing what I'm doing, but just knowing I had to do something different than what I had been doing. The outcome was really, really good for this young boy. He, found his power and regained courage and could speak again. And for months after the trial ended, his parents would call me and thank me. And it was really quite transformative. That is where I began to change. And I think the timing of me meeting that little boy was perfect, because right after that, I became an Indian residential school adjudicator. So for people who don't know what that is, the government of Canada and the churches, the Catholic Church, the United Church, they entered into a settlement agreement as a result of a class action. And the settlement agreement allowed for a couple things to happen. One was there was going to be a closed door independent assessment process where survivors of residential schools could claim, could speak about the abuses that they endured for the purpose of obtaining compensation or a decision on compensation. Then there was a more public-facing Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and that one traveled the entire country. Survivors came forward, spoke publicly about their experiences, and that was a very public-facing process. So there were two streams. I was in the closed-door process. And in the closed door process as an adjudicator, what I had to do was I had to travel the country, sometimes out of the country, meet with survivors, hear their stories, and make assessments about their credibility, their reliability, for the purpose of determining what, if any, compensation they're owed. And I did that for like far too long. But what I found when I came into that process was lots of things. It was a massive learning. And so my hands always go up to Indigenous people who went to residential schools, because they taught me what law school never did. And that really is, fundamentally what trauma-informed lawyering is, which I'm going to break down for you in a few minutes. But what I came to see were these patterns in those hearings. One was, even though we would be talking about events that happened sometimes 40, 50, 60, even 70 years ago, people would show up with like raw emotion, and I couldn't understand why it was so difficult for people to speak about what they experienced, because in my mind, it happened a long time ago. They should be over it by now. Like, these were all my assumptions. I also noticed a pattern in how folks would communicate and behave as they started to tell their stories. And I wanted to understand that a little bit more. So that was when I started to read up on trauma. And then I also began to notice how not only was I impacted by the stories that I was witnessing, the lawyers in the room for Canada, for the church, for whoever was in that room was also becoming impacted. And over the years, I started to notice the impacts on my colleagues. But I also began to notice the impacts on myself, because we're not just talking about the sexual abuse of children. We're not just talking about legalized kidnapping of Indigenous kids, and all of which is totally like horrific. We're not just talking about physical abuse. We were talking about and hearing stories of acts of torture, witnessing homicide, being the victim of attempted murder, being put in electric chairs, being forced into medical experimentation. Like, the list is long of the kinds of things that we were hearing. And as the process went on, I began to also see that in order to make space for people so they could tell me their story without fear, because everyone comes to lawyers, I think, with a lot of fear. I needed to create a safe space for them. And I needed to now explore safety. And that was really tough for me because I didn't know what safety was. Like, I never felt safe in any room in my whole life. So I now had to start to think about what safety means for me, what safety means for other people, how I can create a safe space, etc. And so it goes on like that. But inevitably, I had to leave that role early before my term expired because my mental health was just not okay. I was not doing okay for all kinds of reasons. And the result was, as soon as I left, I went into intensive therapy. I was in therapy for probably a year. And the first 4 months I was seeing my therapist about 3 to 4 times a week. Like, so that gives you an idea of just where my head was at. And I wasn't sure I was ever going to come back to law. I wasn't sure I could ever be a lawyer again after that experience. And it was only after all of that, once I came through it, I realized, and I became really angry because I was like, why didn't law school prepare me for all of this? And how many lawyers have left the practice of law because they encountered something that they were not prepared for? For example, the kind of depravity that exists in the world, the human suffering that people have to endure, and the list goes on and on and on. And so when I came out of therapy, I started to read on trauma and connecting it to lawyering. And I was really blessed to have come across an article by my friend Sarah Katz. She teaches at Temple University for anyone at the School of Law. So for anyone who has listened to the Trauma Informed Lawyer podcast, you would have heard Sarah because I interviewed her. She and Dia Halder wrote an article called The Pedagogy of Trauma-Informed Lawyering. And it was written from the perspective of these two women who practice family law. And I've never practiced family law. And so I started to look at this event, I started to look at this article, and I began to see a lot of parallels between what they were experiencing and what I had experienced. Then they gave us in the article these 4 hallmarks of trauma-informed lawyering. So what I have done is I have expanded that to reflect my lived experience, particularly as an Indigenous woman, and particularly as somebody who has had the unique experience as an adjudicator to see how lawyers treat their clients, and where lawyers do harm, whether they intend it or not. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about what that framework is. So imagine, if you will, a bit of a diagram with like 5 little bubbles, right? So there's 1 up top, 2 on the sides, 1 on the bottom, and 1 in the center. So at the center, I see the lawyer, right? It's the self. And I feel and believe that if lawyers are interested in making space for trauma and learning about how to bring a trauma-informed approach to lawyering, it begins with them. They need to build up a self-awareness practice. They have to cultivate it. That requires self-reflection. It also then requires examining the things that trigger you, the traumas that you bring into your practice, and then figuring out how you regulate yourself when you are triggered. So you need your own self-regulation practice, and also self-critique, because we have to think about our biases and how our biases inform the ways in which we connect and disconnect from people. And I think once we've focused sufficiently on ourselves and what we bring and what we hold back and why we do what we do and where we learn the things that we learned, and examined whether those things are actually still working for anyone, or if they're outdated and we need to learn a new way of doing, new way of relationship building, then we can start to like expand our circle and look at trauma. So what is it? I mean, there's a million different definitions, and I often rely on Bessel van der Kolk and Gabor Mate. So Bessel van der Kolk says, trauma is, yes, the event that has happened, but it's not just that. It's the current imprint of pain, horror, and fear that lives inside people. And as soon as I read that, like all the lights came on for me. I began to understand why people had so much raw emotion, like just coming out of them. When we were talking about historical events I thought people should be past, like you should be over it by now. I came to understand that actually the effects of trauma can continue to live inside people their whole lives. Like they could die in that state of pain, horror, and fear if they never ever do the work that requires them to actually look at it and then and feel it, release it, and let it go. But Gabor Mate has also said that it's not just the event that has happened to people. Like, yes, it's the traumatic event for sure, but it's two things. One, it's the wounding that continues to just, you know, just continue to grow inside of us because we're not healing it. And two, it's not always a result of the event. Sometimes it's the thing that didn't happen that can create a wounding. So if we think about children or anybody, like anyone in a workplace who show up and they think, you know, well, I'm entitled to safety in the workplace, and then they don't get it. Or we think about children who are entitled to safety and protection and love and attention. They don't get those things. Well, that can create a wound, right? And that wound can kind of fester and grow, and it touches everything that we do, every relationship that we have. And so if we understand this about trauma, then it's not just some tiny event or some big event or the thing that didn't happen, but it's the wounding that continues to live in people. Then what we're going to understand then is that people who come to us because of something that's happened, you know, more recently, and even if we think, oh, it's not a very big deal, for all we know, for that person it is a huge deal. And also for that person, it could be a trigger of some former wound, like some former event that has created a wound, and it just makes the wound even bigger. We have to understand that is what trauma is. And people we meet will let us know almost right away whether they've healed their wounds or they're still wounded. Why? Because it shows up in their behavior, usually through fight, flight, and freeze. And I think all lawyers need to get really familiar with what those three responses are. Or the fawn strategy that a lot of people show up with. Fawning is more like just saying yes to everything, avoiding conflict, just having no boundaries, and just trying to appease people left, right, and center, and having no real sense of identity. But I think fight, flight, and freeze speak for themselves. And when I say lawyers should get to know those responses, it's not just for the benefit of identifying those things in your clients when they come to you, but also identifying which one you default to when you are being triggered. Because what have I found is that wherever there is trauma, there's also triggers. Those things seem to go hand in hand. And I think that we have to get real about what our triggers are. Why? Because if we start to understand what triggers us, then we can begin to create some kind of strategy that helps us to regulate our emotions. Self-regulation is really, really important, because if we're not self-regulated and we are reacting everywhere we go because we're constantly triggered, what's going to happen is people aren't going to feel safe in our company. I mean, I often use the example of some really horrible judges I've appeared in front of. They show up really, really angry. They're almost like hostile. And what I see is lawyers stressed before they appear in front of those judges, struggling to appease those judges, and almost to the detriment of their client, because so much energy is going to try to regulate the emotions of the judge, who has no self-regulation mechanism at all. And I think that's such a disservice that we do to people, is ask them to regulate our emotions, because we haven't figured out how to do that for ourselves. And I think that once we get that down, then, you know, the ways people show up and the behaviors that they exhibit around us isn't going to rattle us so much, because we come to realize that that's all about them. Whether someone's yelling or doing whatever, it has nothing to do with us. And then we are a lot more calmer as we walk through the world and walk through our firms and whatever it might be. And one of the really big bonuses of being regulated at all times is you can offer that to your colleagues, you can offer it to your clients, and therapists call it co-regulation. Just by being this like person who is calm, relaxed, not reacting, thoughtfully responsive, we can help people, you know, kind of diffuse whatever is going on for them. And I think as lawyers, this is a really important piece of what we do. Why? Because people show up naturally in states of fear or stress or anxiety. And if they've been traumatized, either because of that thing that brought them to our door, because of some history that they and they've been living in this wound since that historical event occurred, then we can prepare for all of those emotions without making it about us, and help people to find there are some psychologists who talk about something called the window of tolerance, right? Like there's a space inside all of us, and either our windows are really wide and we can tolerate a lot, or our windows are really small and we can't tolerate very much. I think when people come to us from fight, flight, and freeze, which is many of them, their windows are quite small. And the problem with that, when your window is really small and you can't pay attention and you're not rational and you're in fight or flight or freeze, you can't give good instructions, you can't listen well, you can't communicate well, everything is coming from a state of emotion. And so, this, I guess, is like emotional intelligence really is what I'm talking about. This piece is understanding what those components are and why it might be helpful for us to prepare for the emotions that people bring to us when they seek our assistance, and also how to de-escalate without demeaning people. Like, you need to lower your voice if you're going to talk to me. I mean, I can't tell you how many people I've heard say that to individuals, and actually what people are expressing is their fear, and they're not even being accusatory, they're not threatening anyone. And anyway, the list goes on. There's lots of value in learning and understanding what our triggers are and how we can regulate for the purpose of co-regulation. And I think once we get there, we can start to think about how we connect with people, how we create safety. Because if we accept that people come to us in a state of fear, they're going to be needing connection and a sense of safety. Okay, I don't want to take up all the time because I know that there's some Q&A. There's stuff I could tell you about cultural humility, and that's like a whole other thing. If you're interested in it, or if you ever think about cultural competence, I'm going to ask you to push cultural competence aside and Google cultural humility, particularly Dr. Melanie Turvalon and Dr. Jean-Marie Garcia. They have some really helpful things to teach us that were inspired by, the witnessing of the beating of Rodney King that happened many years ago in LA. And the last component, like, of those bubbles that I was telling you about, is really about how do we release trauma? Because I'm a firm believer that energy travels with people. And if we've got people constantly coming to us in a state of suffering, they leave a piece of their suffering with us, or at the very least, we as lawyers become witnesses to their suffering. Now, does that become, could that become vicarious trauma, or could that trigger our own personal traumas? It depends, right, on what our lived experience is. But I know for certain, if we're not okay, nobody's going to be okay. We can't offer compassion to others if we don't have it for ourselves. We can't give, we can't offer safety to others if we don't have safety for ourselves, right? And so I do think that our statistics on both sides of the border are not good when it comes to lawyers' mental health. And, if some people see little value in learning these principles for their clients, then learn it for yourself, right? Or learn it for your profession, because inevitably the traumas of others are going to become our traumas. And I just don't think that we compartmentalize as well as we like to think we do. And particularly when we think about vicarious trauma, it's something that's cumulative. So as we're going through practice and we're being exposed to all kinds of things and we're shoving it down because we can't deal with it, we've got to move on to the next file and we got to do the next thing. What I've also come to learn is that trauma waits for all of us. So the thing we're not addressing today is the thing that becomes our nightmares 20 years from now. And I can't tell you how many retired judges, retired police officers, retired lawyers I've talked to who go into retirement and begin to have nightmares about something that they either presided over, investigated, or prosecuted 20 years previous, right? So It waits for us, and better to deal with it now and have strategies now. And we have no time to get into strategies, but so I'll just stop talking.
Myrna, I just want to thank you so much. That was absolutely incredible. I'm sitting here nodding and thinking about how you, through your candid presentation of your story, it can help us start to think about ways in which we can inform our practice and our work and the ways we connect with others. So I really want to thank you for that presentation. Very unique way of presenting all of this to us. I was curious, and I think I just wanted to start with this. What do you think it is about the practice of law that might draw people in who may have experienced trauma, as you said, you yourself did? And I was also very interested about what you said about judges and that kind of that they would desire that sort of supplication that you were referring to. So sort of what it is about the practice that might draw people in and how we can kind of flip that on its head and become healers.
Okay, thank you for that question. So let me just talk about, so I've had Dr. Amar Dahl on my podcast as well, and he's a lawyer turned therapist out of Australia. And he had done some studies or read some studies, and I think we talked about this, where lawyers tend to come into law, or at least there's like portions of lawyers who come into law for one of two main reasons. One is they've either been harmed themselves, so they want to help others achieve the justice they didn't get, right? They want to become the advocates that they never had. And we see a lot of people doing that in all kinds of social justice worlds, social justice circles. The other piece is what he had found is that there are a number of lawyers who've been traumatized in their lives and want nothing to do with having to look at themselves, look at their trauma, feel anything. And so lawyering becomes a really good profession to get into, and where you get compensated really well for being cutthroat and unfeeling and uncaring, right? But eventually, that coping mechanism fails, and what ends up happening is we see really high uptake in coping through alcohol, connecting through alcohol, other forms of substance abuse. We see people becoming so incredibly dehumanizing that everywhere we go, everywhere they go, people begin to feel dehumanized in their presence. So it's going to fail them ultimately. And I think that lawyers really need to look at our, need to reconsider our roles and how can we become healers. I think we could still do the tough job of having to scrutinize somebody's credibility and reliability, but we could also do it in a way that doesn't create new wounds for those people who come to our spaces of justice. And you know, I think if we're interested in the mental health of the profession, if we're interested in getting through our careers in a way where our mental health is still intact and our good relationships are still intact, then we need to begin to explore this approach to practice.
I wanted to see if others in the group had questions, but then I thought that, someone had asked for the authors about cultural humility, because if we don't have a lot of questions, then we would have time to delve into that as well.
Bonnie, both Tair and Duncan and Motir all have their hands up. I think Tair was first.
Oh, okay. Okay,
and
thank
Bruce,
you.
so we have 4 questions. Yeah.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's go in order.
Thanks. Thank you so much for this presentation. I can't tell you how much it resonated with me on every level, and your bravery in sharing your story, and even it's just, I completely relate to this, and I also deeply experience that. And lately I've been also personally pondering how in my own practice I'm constantly getting re-triggered for my own childhood traumas. I come from a family that was stuck in a cycle of poverty, and we were constantly getting evicted. I had no housing stability, and here I am advocating for people's housing rights, and it's totally linked to the childhood trauma, no doubt. And yeah, like my nervous system is like really shot by the work that I do, because it's like, you know, that like childhood wounding, and you're like experiencing it on the daily through, you know, what's going on with your clients' lives. So yeah, like, wow, I'm just like really blown away. And I'm so grateful that you're doing this work and elevating awareness about this, because it's so crucial for our mental health. Yeah, you're trailblazing. Wow. And I'm just like blown away, and I'm so grateful. And I wanted to ask you if you are available to do trainings, you know, because I'm thinking like within my own agency, Legal Services of the Hudson Valley, we do like probably once every couple of years, a training on trauma informed lawyering. But I found these trainings to be really basic, really like common sense, like duh, like if you're feeling overloaded, you need to do self-care. Like, you know, that's like my takeaway from those trainings. And I just always find them to be so inadequate. And I would love to like maybe propose to my HR team to have you come and talk to me and my colleagues about this. And I don't know, are you doing that right now?
I am. I'm doing almost that exclusively. Like, I hardly practice law anymore. And I just want to say, you know, thank you for sharing a little bit of your life and your lived experience here in this space. I think it's always really powerful when somebody feels safe enough to do so. So I just want to acknowledge that. Yeah, I do a ton of training now, like so much. And I honestly thought, you know, when I dropped the podcast a couple of years ago, as we were going into the pandemic, it was going to be a few lawyers in Vancouver listening. Now people are listening to that podcast all over the world, and it's gotten almost 100,000 downloads. And out of that has become me building up training on trauma-informed lawyering, trauma-informed judicial practice, trauma-informed engagement, trauma-informed decision, like so many things that are not trauma-informed care and trauma-informed support, because they don't do those things as a lawyer. But I do all kinds of training. So you can find me at my website, follow me on LinkedIn. I post a lot of my work there, as well as Instagram at the Trauma Informed Lawyer. And if some of what I said really resonates with you, I really invite you to listen to the Trauma Informed Lawyer podcast, because that entire thing is just a wealth of education from all the lawyers, the judges, the police officers, the mental health therapists who've shown up to have conversations with me. Has been like, that podcast has had so many lawyers, judges, and police officers emailing me going, oh my God, I just listened to your conversation with so-and-so, and it brought up something for them. And I think this is the way of the future. And I'm starting to go into America. I'm going to be going to Oregon. I was just in Los Angeles and New Orleans. I'm going to Detroit. I'm going to Minneapolis. So invite me and I will show up.
Okay. Thank you so much.
That was so great. I was thinking, I know we have a lot of questions, but I was thinking people could even have like lunch and learns in their own, like you could in your own practice Tair, and listen to the podcast and then discuss too, until Myrna is able to get to you. Okay, so the next person was Mokir. And I'm sorry if I mispronounced.
Hi, yeah, thanks, man. That was brilliant. There, I mean, yeah, there is so much there that I wanted. Well, that I need to unpick this idea of the survival mode. But I just want to sort of, so I guess sort of frame it in two ways. So, you know, there's my own personal trauma, I guess, which is there about regulating my own emotions, and then there's the legal matters themselves, which I'm sort of public lawyer, administrative, so I could see it sort of fitting in, you know, police, rape, crime, family, welfare, particularly climate breakdown as well, and the idea of future-proofing for particular things, because I see it more and more happening in terms of, say, for example, benefit cuts in the cost of living crisis, people being cut off because there is no capacity to regulate that trauma which is coming through. So, and also future-proofing in terms of how the climate breakdown will impact on communities and decision-making. So I'm just, I guess, in those types of trauma-informed you talked about, is there a sort of trauma-informed regulatory practice or trauma-informed welfare practice? That, because I also teach law as well at the University of Law. So I'm just thinking about under the legal skills and practice course, whether there could be some specific thing that could be sort of brought in onto that.
Yeah, I can't say I don't know. I mean, like, I think law schools need to be teaching trauma-informed lawyering, need to teach emotional intelligence for lawyers. But I know, like, when I talk to law societies, regulators are thinking about how to recognize this as a critical competency, because it's really not a soft skill in my view. And I'm noticing even physicians inviting me in. So through their regulatory bodies, they're thinking about how do we bring trauma-informed processes to learner mistreatment or our disciplinary adjudication processes. So yeah, I don't know, like if you look for it, I'm sure you're going to find something.
Duncan is next. Thank you, Duncan.
Thank you. Yes, I just want to say, along with the others, I just so appreciate your work and your forthrightness about bringing this forward. I went to law school and then I made the choice to become a psychotherapist, partly because of what you're saying about the dissociative nature of being a lawyer. I just didn't want to argue for my way of making a living. And I wanted to try to help people to heal rather than continue the harm. And what I wonder about is whether or not we could create a course in law school called Being a Lawyer is Being a Person. That lawyering is real people doing real things with other people. And when I went to law school, there was nothing about the practice of law involving people. It was always abstract theories. It was always principles. It was constitutional law. It was this, but it had nothing to do with people. So I just needed so much work on my own to be able to learn how to be a person and then help other people to be a person. So I appreciate your willingness to step forward about that. I'm just wondering whether you have some suggestions for those of us that might want to teach in law school, not only about the trauma aspect of being a lawyer, but just personally what it's like to be involved in emotionally difficult things, because that's how I spend most of my professional life now, is helping people deal with difficult emotional things for them in their inner world.
Yeah, for sure. So I could tell you like a couple places maybe to start looking to explore this is my friend Claudia Penna. She and Alicia Varani are teaching a course on trauma-informed lawyering at UCLA Law School. And they also have a restorative justice course, or maybe it's called transformative justice. Anyway, there's like lots of good stuff there that I think you could find easily. Natalie Netzel, I just had on my podcast. She's a professor of law at Mitchell Hamline School of Law in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I don't know, Minnesota. So there are people, educators, law profs who are beginning to explore all of these different pieces. And it's not always trauma-informed lawyering, but also how to bring humility to the practice of law. So yeah, for sure.
The next person is Julie.
Okay, thank you. This was just such a powerful presentation, such an important presentation. And it just happened to be that I was with a friend yesterday who is a lawyer who became a social worker, who lost both of her parents very early and in life, and her father was alcoholic. And I was happened to be looking into stuff. I don't know, for some reason I've been focusing more on how the Nazis rose to power and the Holocaust, and she was saying that she thinks so much of this is unprocessed grief on so many deeper levels. And when you said that line about being ruthless and detached is exactly what I wanted to be when I grew up. You know, just that explains so much about how people, whether or not they personally become Hitler, like how people can just turn away and not respond to, you know, the larger things that are going on. And I guess anyway, so I just wanted to convey so much gratitude for the work you're doing, and also ask, this is probably a larger question, so maybe too much to go into right now, but just, you know, when you found your clients opening up and really getting into the depths of, you know, what they're going through, have you found that that helps in the legal cases that you're involved with, like helps to, you know, be able to convey that more to juries, or I don't know, obviously the way the legal system is structured can totally get in the way, but just curious.
Totally. The way the legal system is structured totally gets in the way, because like you still have a lot of people, I think, who operate from the state of like facts only, right? Like facts only, please. We don't want to be dealing with human emotion. But what I want to say is what I've come to understand is that I think what people really are looking for is an opportunity to be seen, to be heard, and to know that what they say to you matters. You as the lawyer, or you as the judge, or you as the jury. And if you can create a space like that, then that is way more rewarding or way more healing than any potential outcome somebody was hoping for. And all of that begins, I think, in the time that we take to build a relationship with people that is really rooted in safety and connection. And just, you know, being treated like a human being by a lawyer has been so transformative for people. I can't tell you how many clients who were a little like cautious about, well, I don't know that I want to actually, you know, go to the police station with this, or I don't know that I want to go to the Human Rights Tribunal with this. But then after I've talked to them and assured them that I would ensure that they had the space to bring them their whole selves to that space in a way that felt safe for them, then they would say, okay, I'm going to do it. And they were really thankful, and they felt closure just for being able to get through that process in a way where they felt like they were being prioritized. So I think that's why we do what we do. That's what matters.
Yeah, and that sounds very therapeutic. You know, I'm a psychologist, and it's also very therapeutic. So thank you so much for the work you're doing. Yeah.
Thank you. And I wanted to say to folks on this call, if you're interested in some of what I'm talking about today, Amar Dahl is coming, you should listen to the episode I did with him, Emotional Intelligence and the Art of Living. And he talks about how emotional intelligence can benefit lawyers, and he says so much. Anyway, he and I are putting a course together, which we're delivering over 3 days on the West Coast. So Whistler, British Columbia, it's north of Seattle, right? That's where we are. We're going to deliver a 3-day course. It's an educational retreat for lawyers, and it's 3 days of just going and doing a deep dive into a lot of this stuff. So we're going to talk about, you know, why trauma is not a dirty word. He's going to bring the neurosomatic understanding of what trauma is and how trauma shapes personality, and then how we manage those personalities and lack of boundaries in the spaces that we occupy as lawyers. And it's going to be really amazing. So for anyone who is interested in actually getting away to a really beautiful, beautiful skiing village, which in the summertime is a hiking village, find me, connect with me. Aideen has all my contact info.
Thank you. So we have 2 more questions from Bruce, and then following with Aideen, which is a great way to kind of close out. So Bruce is next.
Thank you, Myrna. I have had a fair amount of experience with the kind of issues you're talking about in our therapeutic court. Minnesota actually has a large Native American population, and so we see people with some of the very same experiences you've had. And we've had some training. It's getting better. It's not adequate yet. I'm just wondering if you could be a little more specific when you say some of the experience that you've had as a lawyer triggered you. You know, we use the word trigger a lot. Can you say what your internal experience was?
Sure, I can. So sometimes when I would hear the stories of the rape of children, like really, really young children, I would find myself almost like just kind of floating out of the room, like literally floating out of the room. I remember being in some hearings where I had to constantly hold the table because I felt like otherwise I was going to float away. And I came to realize later that that's like my, dissociation kicking in. Other people, when they would talk about maybe being beaten, because I used to be beaten quite a bit by my mother, I would speed up the way I was talking to try and get through that part of their story as quickly as I could, because it was bringing up a lot of rage in me, and I didn't want to treat the person I was talking to with anger or hostility because it wasn't theirs. I also would notice that sometimes if I read a file and I knew I was going into the hearing and I was going to be dealing with some stuff, like say I was going to be meeting with a perpetrator that day, somebody who had been convicted of perpetrating sexual violence against women in particular, which is a sore spot for me. It was very hard for me to be present in spaces like that because I would feel under threat. And what I would find is that my anxiety would get really, really high that day because I wasn't feeling safe. And then consequently, what would happen is I would be really detached from the conversation, really unfeeling. I wouldn't offer any compassion. And then later, after the hearing was over, I would just be filled with so much rage, and a lot of that rage I ended up internalizing, and and then things just didn't go well for me. And these are some of the ways in which I was triggered. And when I talk with lawyers and judges and police officers about triggers, it's a lot of the same things. And I, not being somebody who has a mental health background, I really feel like we all move from fight, flight, freeze, and then the strategy of fawn. And that's why we need to get really familiar with what is our default, because once we can identify it, we can figure out how to regulate ourselves. And so how did I go from that to this? Well, now today, when I have to deal with similar issues, I do a lot of self-talk. I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe, I'm safe. If I need to leave, I can leave. I bring in usually something I hold on to, which is like a tiny stone I will hold in my pocket. Nobody even notices that I have it. Or I will like tap my knees and be really thoughtful about the fact that I'm sitting in a room and my feet are on the floor and I'm okay and I'm present. And I do a lot of like, it's not about me, it's not about me, it's not about me. Even if somebody is reminding me of my mother or one of these perpetrators from my own life, it's not like, this isn't my story, this isn't about me. And probably the biggest gift I've given myself is to come up with a strategy where I disconnect a lot of the trauma and suffering that people bring me. I push it away. I take it off of me. I don't let it come home with me. So I have really good boundaries now about like what kind of files I bring into my home, what files I leave at the office, when the day ends, what I can do, what I can't do, what my role is. And then also when it's been a heavy day, I need to go into the mountains and go for a hike. Like this is how I wash this stuff off of me, because like I said earlier, everything has energy. And if we don't have a ritual that allows us to reflect on what did I see, what did I hear, how did it impact me, and I need to like push the stuff off of me. We I think unconsciously or subconsciously carry that stuff around.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And let's conclude with Aideen. I think she'll be the last question, Nanette, unless there's another. Aideen.
Thank you so much. I know we're like close to, well, technically over time, but close to time. I'm so eternally grateful, Myrna, for what you share and how bravely you share it. And I'm just so grateful. I don't have really the words at the moment for it. But what I wanted to ask is directly about spirituality, because I loved when I emailed you, you said that you were so keen to attend to anything that had spirituality in the title. And for me, I think trauma-informed lawyering and like integrating spirituality into well, the world, but into law are very much the same thing in my mind, in terms of trying to be like a healing force in the world. But I would love to hear from you what you think. Is there a spiritual component to trauma-informed lawyering? How do you see it? If you have any thoughts and you're comfortable in sharing them, I think that would be a great note to.
Sure. Okay, so what I'm going to tell you comes really from my indigenous culture. So in my culture, and I think in a lot of indigenous / Native American cultures, we believe that there is life in everything. There is what we deem in the white world is, inanimate objects actually have life, like the tree is life, water is life, the air is life, right? And I keep that in mind at all times for a few reasons. One is I recognize that the forest and the ocean and the streams and the rivers offer me healing. So I go there for healing. An elder once told me about why it's important to run your hands under the water, because the water is a healer. Ask the water to pull all that negative energy off of you, and it will. If you don't have access to the ocean, you can go to a river, you could go to a stream, you could go to your kitchen sink, hell, you could get in your shower. It's all water, right? And all water is life. And I think about that all the time. I'm like always in the forest hugging trees, because that's the place where I get re-energized and where I put down the heaviness of the world. And I think we need to understand, for many of us lawyers and even judges, we have to confront things that happen in the world that a lot of people don't ever get to see, have to see. And you can't unsee things and you can't unhear things. And those things can really haunt you and stay with you, because energy travels with everything. Like, I look at trauma as a spirit. I look at addiction, alcoholism as a spirit. I look at fear as a spirit. Suicidal ideation is also its own spirit. And I think about, like, well, what do I want following me home? Like, what has followed me home in the past? Because trauma wants to travel everywhere, like all these other entities. And so what can we do to protect ourselves and insulate ourselves? I think that, in the indigenous world, the ceremonies that we have that keep us connected to the spirit world, this is the way we negotiate our survival with the creator. And I think non-indigenous people, you also need your own negotiation, your own thing that you negotiate your survival through. And what is it? And I think in my world, I've seen too many lawyers negotiating with alcohol for their survival. Like, if I just drink a little bit more, I could, not be haunted by what I saw today, or I could get through this really tough week. And Eduardo Duran, who's a Apache and Lakota Native American therapist who operates out of Billings, Montana, he talks a lot about, group trauma and intergenerational trauma, and how alcohol is the one thing that we should never rely on to help us get through difficult times, because it's a spirit, it wants spirit. So it can take things from you when you think, it's the thing that's actually helping you and healing you. It can just actually, it'll harm you. And I invite lawyers to think about, what tools can we use to help us cope and connect that's not alcohol? And so I rely on nature. And I invite people to think about, what is the thing that you can utilize? And I rely on nature because I recognize the spirits in these things, and they're good spirits that help me walk through some really dark spaces, all of the dark spaces that we all have to walk through sometimes. And alcohol has a darkness about it, and I don't want to walk with that anymore. And because I tried that, all my colleagues were doing it, and it just didn't go well for me. And so that's one thing. But the other thing is that I think that we can create good relationships and good relations with our colleagues just by simply asking each other, how are you coping? How are you coping? You're essentially saying, I see you, I hear you, and what you say to me matters, and I'm going to make space to listen to you. Because I can't tell you how many lawyers, judges, and judges in particular who've reached out to me to say, I'm going through this. I listened to a conversation you had and I was like, oh my God, I'm going through this. And then like within a couple of weeks, I get an email, confidential email from another judge sitting on the same court talking about the same thing. And yet these two, like nobody's talking to each other because there's such a fear of mental health stigma and how people are going to call our reputation into question. And I think it's shitty. And I think we all need to start talking and normalizing that, you know, as human beings showing up to do this job, we are impacted by the suffering that we witness. And we need to just call on all the good spirits around us to help us do what we do. And sometimes those good spirits are in your colleagues down the hall.
Thank you, Myrna, so much. That was such a powerful way for us to end this discussion. And I think that so many of us find that satisfaction as being a part of PISLAP, to be able to come together, and the fact that you did create that safe space for many of us were able to share our own experiences as you shared yours. So I wanted to thank you so much for coming today and for this beautiful discussion that we had, exactly what Aideen said we would have. Nanette, I wanted to turn it back to you if there's anything else you'd like to say before we close out today. And I know we're going to have a recording of this and hopefully some of the authors that you've shared that you can share with us as well. Thank you so much.
Oh no, just deep appreciation to Myrna and to everyone. It was a really, as Bonnie, I couldn't say it better. It was a really deep and wonderful discussion, and definitely will follow up. And Myrna, maybe I can get a few citations from you to some of the authors that you mentioned that some of us may not be familiar with, and we could share out to our larger community with the recording. But thank you so much. And everyone, our next call is January 9th, and Anita Madali, who's on the call, one of our presenters, along with her colleague Cynthia Lindner, will be a dialogue between a law teacher and theologian, and can't really describe it right now, but it's going to be very interesting. But much appreciation to Myrna. It was really wonderful. And Aideen, thank you for that last question on spirituality. It's a great capstone. All right. Be well, all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays, everyone.